When it comes to symbols of Japan, is there anything more iconic than Mount Fuji? Towering majestically over its surrounding landscape, Fujisan embodies the very essence of the land of the rising sun. From art and literature to poetry, films, and photography, Japan's tallest mountain has inspired countless works and serves as a powerful symbol of the nation itself. Considered sacred for centuries, Mount Fuji has also long been a destination for pilgrims and travelers alike, drawing people from all over the world to marvel at its beauty and significance. But Mount Fuji is far more than just some lone peak rising into the clouds. It is surrounded by an array of natural wonders that only serve to add to its mystique and allure. The shimmering waters of the Fuji Five Lakes, the vibrant flower fields that change with the seasons, and the dense forests that form a landscape that's as diverse as it is breathtaking. And among these forests is one in particular that has captured the fascination and the imagination of many: Aokigahara. Also known in Japanese as Jukai, or the Sea of Trees, Aokigahara is a forest located at Mount Fuji's northwestern base, and its name suits it well. It is a dense sea of green that, while undeniably beautiful, also has an eerie quality to it, one that goes way beyond its tangled roots and silent pathways. Because there is a unique atmosphere to be found here, one that is tied not only to the forest's natural characteristics, but also to a deeper and more complex story, one shaped by history, folklore, and most of all, human struggles. Over the past few decades especially, Aokigahara has become a place associated with death more than anything, drawing in countless individuals who seek to spend their final moments here. An unfortunate reality that in the process has also brought widespread media attention to the forest, both in Japan and abroad. And as a result, Aokigahara is now just as much of a symbol of natural beauty as it is a haunting fascination in the eyes of the general public, its reputation even giving rise to myths and legends about the restless spirits that allegedly reside between its towering trees. But why Aokigahara? What is it about this dense, mysterious sea of trees that has made it a destination tied to both natural wonder and profound human struggle? In today's video, I would like to take you on a sort of field trip into Aokigahara, exploring its long and interesting history, its unique natural characteristics, its cultural significance, but also the sad stories it has to offer when it comes to mental health and the human condition. That being said, let me just give a quick disclaimer before we get started. By nature, this video will contain several references to sensitive topics, including struggles with mental health and self-inflicted death. If you or someone you know is struggling, consider reaching out to a mental health professional or one of your local hotlines, which you can find at the link shown on your screen right now and in the description down below. Help is available, and you don't have to face this alone. But now, let's get into some history. This is the story behind Aokigahara, Japan's forest of life and death. The story of Aokigahara Forest begins with what else but a natural disaster. Japan always had its fair share of those. But instead of a tsunami or an earthquake, it was a volcanic eruption that kicks off this story. In 864, Mount Fuji erupted. Known as the Chogan eruption, this was the second major eruption of Fujisan in recorded history, and the most catastrophic of them all to date. It lasted for around 10 days, and chronicles of that era paint a picture of what the devastation must have looked and felt like. Plants and trees burning, rocks falling from the sky like rain, lakes hissing with steam. The lava that flowed down Mount Fuji's western flank eventually reached Senoumi Lake, which was divided into multiple smaller lakes as a result. But along the way, the lava also caused large-scale destruction, tearing down entire homes and even villages. It was an event deserving of the word disaster, But as much suffering and destruction as it caused, the Chogan eruption of 864 also ended up creating something new. The mix of lava and mud that poured down from Mount Fuji reshaped its surrounding landscape significantly, filling in valleys and leveling the terrain, and it was on this vast layer of hardened lava that the Jukai, the sea of trees that we now call Aokigahara, came to life. Over the following 1,000 plus years, the forest would grow and grow on the fertile ground created by the Chogan eruption. And actually, the hardened lava ground below Aokigahara served to make the forest unique in more than just one way. Not only is the forest unusually dense because of it, it is said that some parts are so dense with trees that even when it rains heavily, you won't feel a single drop. But the lava rock also serves to make Aokigahara unusually quiet as well, absorbing a lot of the sounds that can usually be heard in a forest like this. Combine that with the sheer amount of trees and plants, and what you got is an eerily quiet place that is also very easy to get lost in as well. So sure, Aokigahara is dark, eerie, and quiet. But the same could be said about a lot of other forests. And even if Aokigahara is an extreme example of all these characteristics, that doesn't explain why this place has become the most frequented spot when it comes to ending one's own life in all of Japan. To find out how exactly Aokigahara became a place associated with death, we also have to understand a little bit more about Japan's history with self-inflicted death, and how it moved into the forest in the first place. Historically speaking, Japan's relationship with what they call Jisatsu has always been a bit different from most other parts of the world. More open and tolerant towards the idea, some might say. Self-inflicted death among the general public has, just like everywhere else, always existed in one form or another. But the most well-documented cases to be found in historic records are mostly related to the samurai of old. Surely you've heard about terms like seppuku or harakiri, the ritualistic act of disembowelment associated mainly with the warrior class, done to avoid capture and torture by the enemy, but also as a way of atoning for grave mistakes that you made, instead of having to live in shame. Eventually, you had World War II, when Japan literally used the act of self-inflicted death as a weapon, with its infamous kamikaze and kaiten tactics. In both cases, with seppuku as well as with the kamikaze pilots, this kind of death was not necessarily seen as something negative per se. You either sacrificed yourself for the sake of the empire, or you simply took responsibility for your own actions. On top of that, self-inflicted death was also never seen as a sin in Japan from a religious point of view either. In fact, religion sometimes even served as the motivation for it too. All forms of assisted suicide, including those of religious nature, were actually banned under Emperor Meiji in the late 19th century. But up until that point, and in some cases even a few years and decades after the ban was implemented, certain religious practices of such nature continued. And in some cases, forests served as a location of choice. Through a combination of increasingly long periods of deep, and I mean deep meditation, as well as a strict diet known as mokuchiki that consisted only of what the forest had to offer, certain sects of Japanese Buddhist monks attempted to achieve self-mummification. Self-mummification that was supposed to occur while they were still alive, no less. This whole ritual could last thousands of days. The increasingly strict diet, paired with the reduction of liquid intake over time, dehydrating the body and shrinking the organs. Death was inevitable, but if done correctly, the monk's body was supposedly left mummified and preserved without the use of any artificial preservatives, the practitioner passing away in a state of meditation. While such practices were almost exclusively concentrated in northern Japan, they reflect how, even as far back as the 11th century, forests were often seen by the Japanese as sacred spaces for those seeking to end their own lives, through spiritual means. Beyond religious practices, some also point to folklore as a possible early link between death and Japan's many forests. Ubaste, literally the abandoning of an old woman, was the name of a mythical practice where elderly people were brought to a remote place, such as the mountains or sometimes forests as well, where they were then basically left to die. But how widespread this actually was is unknown, since mentions of such a practice outside of folklore are pretty rare. Still, we can clearly see that, whether it be with real-life examples or in folklore, the forest of Japan did indeed have somewhat of a connection with death, historically speaking. Of course, all of this doesn't really explain the phenomenon that is Aokigahara, does it? I mean, people have without a doubt passed away here for centuries, one way or another. But how did this forest at the foot of the sacred Mount Fuji become such a phenomenon? The most well-known place to end one's own life in a country with such a long-standing history, with what they call Jisatsu. Well, to find the answer to that question, we'll have to look at times more recent than you might have expected. Mere decades in the past instead of centuries. To the 1960s. Written by Japanese author Matsumoto Seicho in 1960, Nami no To, or Tower of Waves, is a short story. A story about love, centered around the complicated romance between its two main protagonists, Onogi Takao, a legal trainee, and the mysterious Yuki Yoriko. Most of the story takes place in Tokyo, but the most dramatic and most iconic moment of Nami no To comes at the very end, when the setting switches over to where else but Aokigahara. Spoiler alert for all of you watching this video who plan to read Nami no To themselves. But at the end of the story, the female protagonist grabs a bottle of pills, walks into the sea of trees, and ends her own life. And so, for the first but certainly not the last time, Aokigahara became a set piece in a wildly successful piece of entertainment media. And when I say successful, I mean it. Nami no To was made into a movie the same year that it was published, followed by 8 different television dramas based on Matsumoto-san's tragic love story. But with this success came tragedy and controversy, because not long after the story's release as a novel, one woman after another was found dead in Aokigahara, with a copy of the book in their possession. This went on for decades, actually. Even by 1985, the book was still linked to deaths in the forests, and according to an editor from the book's publishing house, both the publisher and Matsumoto-san himself received frequent calls from the police whenever such a case occurred. Actually, this wasn't even the first time that members of the Japanese public had been tragically influenced to end their lives at one specific location either. In 1933, for example, a young student named Matsumoto Kiyoko took her own life by leaping into the Mount Mihara volcano, her decision reportedly driven by her forbidden relationship with one of her female classmates. Reports about the death of Matsumoto Kiyoko captured national attention, and tragically, over 100 others followed her example and took their lives at Mount Mihara that same year alone. As for Nami no To, I couldn't find exact numbers or statistics on how many deaths in Aokigahara it actually influenced, but each and every life lost is one too many, of course. And sadly, the release of Matsumoto Seicho's novel in 1960 wasn't the last time that a piece of entertainment media inspired people to seek an end in the sea of trees. 1993 saw the release of Tsurumi Wataru's Kanzen Jisatsu Manual, the complete manual of suicide. The title tells you everything you need to know, really. It's a book that contains a wide range of methods to end one's own life, which I will not describe here since I'm already walking a YouTube tightrope with this whole topic as is. The book itself, however, describes them in graphic detail and even offers instructions on how to pull them off correctly. I probably don't have to tell you that this book was, especially when it was first released, incredibly controversial. Some argue that the book is remarkably well written, and that by presenting its information in a neutral, matter-of-fact tone without encouraging or discouraging its readers, offers a fair amount of educational value. They believe it acknowledges and raises awareness for the reality faced by those struggling, and seeks to reduce unnecessary pain and suffering for those considering such actions. Others, however, are appalled by the sheer fact that this book was even published in the first place, viewing it as nothing more than a disturbing and monetized contribution to the loss of life. I can honestly understand the reasoning behind both perspectives. It's an incredibly complex and sensitive topic. That said, I want to be very clear, I am in no way promoting this book. In fact, without having read it myself and based solely on reviews and discussions I've come across, I would strongly advise against reading it, especially if you're not in a good place mentally. But regardless of what I, or the public, may think of the book, Kanzen Jisatsu Manuaru sold really well, more than 1 million copies in total, and even more so than Matsumoto Seicho's Nami no To did 33 years earlier. It drew widespread attention to Aokigahara. The forest was explicitly described in the book as the perfect place to die, complete with detailed instructions on how to reach it and avoid detection by park rangers, introducing the concept of passing away in Aokigahara to an entirely new generation of Japanese readers. But believe it or not, at the time of the book's release, Japan's rate of self-inflicted deaths had actually been on a slow but steady decline for several decades. However, this trend reversed in the years that followed, because by the late 1990s, numbers skyrocketed, increasing from 17.1 per 100,000 people in 1995 to 25.3 per 100,000 by 1998. A staggering 48% rise in just 3 years. This increase wasn't caused by this book, obviously, because there were several other factors at the time that contributed to this troubling statistic. One key factor was surely Japan's rapidly aging population, a trend that had been underway for quite some time by the late 1990s. In Japan, the rate of self-inflicted deaths generally increases with age, so an older population naturally means a higher baseline of such cases. But this doesn't fully explain the sharp spike observed in the late 1990s. After all, Japan's population has since continued to age steadily, but the rate of self-inflicted deaths, on the other hand, has fluctuated over time. One very significant contributing factor to this sudden rise was very likely the country's economic situation. By the late 1990s, Japan was deeply entrenched in what is often called the lost decade. Following decades of remarkable financial growth, the Japanese economy had stagnated, with unemployment rates climbing to a historic high of 5.5% between 1991 and 2002. It was a period marked by financial hardship and emotional strain, and in a society with such a historically complex relationship with the act of ending one's own life, maybe it's not all that surprising that the rate increased as much as it ultimately did. At the same time, it's important to remember that mental health is a serious and multifaceted issue, one that rarely stems from just a single cause. In the case of Japan during the late 1990s, though, the nation's economic situation and the struggles that came as a result, unemployment especially, undoubtedly played a significant role in contributing to widespread depression and other mental health challenges among the people of Japan. And amid this incredibly challenging economic climate, you had the release of Tsurumi Wataru's controversial Kanzen Jisatsu Manuaru. By the late 90s, the book had gained enough notoriety to be officially designated as a Jukai Tosho, or harmful book, in most parts of Japan. The one notable exception? Tokyo, Japan's capital, its most populous city, and one of the closest major urban centers to Aokigahara, the very forest described in the book as the perfect place to die. So what exactly makes Aokigahara so quote-unquote perfect for those seeking such a tragic end, you might wonder? What is it, beyond its appearances in popular books, movies, and TV dramas, that draws so many people to this particular place? Well, in 1988, 5 years before Tsurumi's controversial book hit store shelves, a Japanese psychiatrist named Takahashi Yoshitomo conducted interviews with individuals who entered Aokigahara intending to end their own lives, but ultimately survived. And according to them, by far one of the forest's most compelling draws was its dense, labyrinth-like terrain, which offered the possibility of passing away without ever being found. Others have suggested a different idea, that the growing number of deaths in the forests may have created a sort of snowball effect. What I mean by that is that for some, Aokigahara might represent a place where they wouldn't have to face the end completely alone, accompanied in a way by the memory of those who had come before. Given all of these factors, I guess it kinda makes sense that word about Aokigahara began to spread, drawing more and more people to the sea of trees with tragic intent. By the early 2000s, the number of bodies discovered in the dense forest had reached unprecedented levels. 78 in 2002, 105 in 2003. Some of these individuals were reportedly found carrying a copy of Tsurumi's manual too, further highlighting the book's impact on Aokigahara and to an extent on society as a whole. At the same time, the rise of the internet in the early 2000s accelerated the spread of information, and as Aokigahara gained notoriety through word of mouth, the press, and online platforms, it inevitably caught the attention of the entertainment industry as well. Initially, Japanese filmmakers began exploring the forest as a setting, but eventually, even Hollywood couldn't resist, drawn in by the forest's eerie reputation. Myths about Aokigahara being haunted by so-called yurei, the restless spirits of Japanese folklore barred from entering the afterlife, only added to its allure, and coupled with the forest's haunting appearance and long history, it became the ideal backdrop for the horror genre. As Aokigahara appeared more frequently on the silver screen, rumors about the forest continued to spread. Some claimed it was a place where, once entered, one could never escape, a belief that honestly isn't entirely unfounded. Venturing off the marked trails can make navigation extremely challenging due to the forest's unusually dense vegetation. But it's all good as long as you bring a compass with you, right? Well, others allege that compasses and electronic devices simply malfunction in the forests. Again, this is half true. While compasses in particular can behave slightly odd in Aokigahara, it's certainly not because of supernatural forces or curses, but simply due to the magnetite-rich lava floor beneath the forest, which can impact the way a compass works just slightly. Not enough to render them useless or anything, but also just enough for myths and rumors to spread. You gotta hand it to Aokigahara, it certainly knows how to sell itself as a haunted forest. As the 2000s progressed, it became clear that the situation in Aokigahara was far more complex than just some harmful fad. While the number of deaths peaked in 2004, with 108 bodies recovered that year, the deaths never completely stopped either. The issue persists to this day, underscoring the deep and ongoing challenges surrounding mental health and societal pressures in Japan. Aokigahara's unsettling reputation gradually became known beyond the borders of Japan as well. The forest began attracting tourists who weren't necessarily interested in its natural beauty, dense vegetation, or diverse wildlife, but were instead drawn in by a morbid curiosity about the dark and shocking tales associated with it. Stories of death, suffering, and ghosts. While most visitors approach their fascination with Aokigahara's grim history with a level of respect, others unfortunately do not. And then there is Logan Paul. In late 2017, the YouTuber, accompanied by a few others, visited Aokigahara to explore the rumors surrounding the forest. During their visit, which they documented in the now infamous video, they came across personal belongings. Sleeping bags, tents, and clothing left behind by individuals who had clearly entered the forests with the intention of ending their lives. At one point in the video, they find an actual dead body in the forests, and not only do they not stay away from it as they should, they get up close to it, filming the corpse with Paul making insensitive remarks about the whole situation. It didn't take long for Logan Paul to experience a huge and honestly rather justified shitstorm in reaction to the video. And not just from people on social media, but also from international news outlets. The video itself was removed soon after publication and followed up by an apology video by Paul himself. But yet again, Aokigahara had entered, and this time on an international stage, the minds of the people as an eerie place of human suffering. The name Aokigahara had truly become synonymous with death. The Japanese government and local authorities are of course well aware of the tragic reputation and ongoing events in the Sea of Trees, and over the years they have worked to implement several measures aimed at reducing the number of deaths in Aokigahara. Surveillance cameras have been installed at the forest entrances to monitor who goes in, bridge rails have been raised, and police presence near the entry points has been significantly increased as well. But a more personal and compassionate approach sees trained volunteers and even local shop owners stepping in to help. Simply engaging with those who approach the forests has often proven to make a big difference. Watanabe Hideo, a 64-year-old owner of a cafe near one of the forest's entrances, said, "Most people who come to this area for pleasure do so in groups. So if I see someone on their own, I will go and talk to them. After a few basic questions, it's usually not so difficult to tell which ones might be here on a suicide mission. A few kind words can go a long way." For visitors, the most visible and striking of all these measures are probably the signs posted at the forest's entry points. Signs that urge visitors to reflect on the value of life through heartfelt messages. Quote, "Life is a precious thing given to us by our parents. One more time, let's think about our parents, siblings, and children. Don't be troubled by yourself. Please confide in someone." End quote. And this valuable reminder is one I would like to echo for anyone watching and struggling in any way. If nothing else, the myths, legends, dark stories, and negative reputation surrounding Aokigahara should serve as a platform for raising awareness about mental health issues. A global problem that extends far beyond Japan and this particular forest. At the same time, while acknowledging the tragedy associated with Aokigahara, it's essential to also remember what this forest truly represents. A place of life, not just death. Because beneath its dense canopy lies a thriving ecosystem of diverse flora and fauna, home to animals like bears, foxes, and wild boars that coexist alongside the vibrant plant life that flourishes on the forest's 1200-year-old lava ground. Aokigahara is not just a site of pain and tragedy. It is also an extraordinary, unique natural wonder at the foot of Mount Fuji, itself an iconic and sacred symbol of Japan. In that sense, this forest kind of embodies the complexities of existence itself, if you really think about it. Beauty and sorrow, life and death. In a way, it feels like holding up a mirror to the human experience. And there you have it, a look inside the history of Aokigahara. Have you ever been there yourself? What impressions did the forests leave on you? Share your experiences in the comments down below. And as always, it's time to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters listed here, including Bobby Wu, Javier Soravia, Capybara Chuck, Turam, Daniel Dees, RK0, Nikola Novakovic, White Gilden, Justin Down, Yoko the Space Whale, Steve Matsui, Cats and Soup, Jart B-Man, Ben Harradine, and Metal Mama. And to everyone else who's still here, thank you so much for watching. Sayonara.